All right, here we are, late, but we're here. Jimi D and the Wolf podcast.
Hello, my friend.
Hello.
How's things, man?
Oh, I stayed up too late last night. It's hard
Me
to get
too.
going this morning.
Yeah, I had to get the kids to school this morning because my wife had an early dentist appointment. And Madeline actually came in there early this morning and said, "You got to wake up because you got to take us to school, and I don't want to be late and you get in trouble." Which was really cute. She had my back. I shaved my beard, so I've been freezing all day.
Yeah,
Outside, it was like 20 this morning, man. It was cold.
You're not old enough now to be on here.
Right?
18.
I got to get a signed permission slip from my mom to do the podcast.
Yeah. So I had a beard once, goatee. I had it for maybe a couple years. I don't know if you've ever seen a picture of me with it.
No.
Yeah, I should post it. I liked it. I thought it was really cool and made me look, sophisticated. But I remember I shaved it off, and the wife of the bandmate that I was with, I guess we hadn't played, or she hadn't seen me since I shaved it off, and we were setting up, and she was there. We were on stage setting up, and she looked up and she said, "Who's that up there setting up the guitar?" And she said she didn't recognize me. I think she was being honest. And she said that when I shaved it off, it took 30 years off my life.
Yeah, people tell me the same thing, man. People tell me I look really young when I shave it.
So, if you're anything older than 30, if someone tells you change something in your appearance and it'll take 30 years off your life, you ain't ever going back to that.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, it's just one person's opinion, but other people were saying, but she's the only one that had such a high number. Some said 10 years, 15 years. So
I've never intentionally shaved a beard off. I just mess them up when I try to trim them, and then I got to shave them off.
Well, that's what happens. Messed up.
Every time, man, it grows it's funny because below my jawline, it grows in a circular pattern. And once that starts, it gets so long, it starts to get out of control, and I try to trim it. And every time, man, I'll just have a bald spot in it and got to do away with the whole thing. That's what happened last night, trying to touch it up, and I ruined it.
Well, talking about beards, as you know, earlier this week, I was able to watch the ZZ Top documentary on Netflix. Those two guys, Dusty and Billy, are probably have the two most famous beards in American culture. I mean,
yeah.
Can there be any more famous? And it really created their brand. I mean, when you go to take classes on how to become an artist and succeed as an artist, you want to have a distinctive brand, and that definitely set them apart. I mean, nobody else has beards like that. And they're on the Johnny Carson show when they're playing, and they pan over to Johnny Carson, and he's got a beard that he put on. People would go Halloween costumes, goes a ZZ Top guy. That and the car. So I didn't tell you. I remember I asked you what were your biggest takeaway was. Oh, back to the beard. I mean, I think many people know, they claim, if you're a ZZ Top fan, they claim that they took a break from music. I'm a huge ZZ Top fan.
Me too, man. I love that.
I've covered some of their songs. She Don't Love Me, She Loves My Automobile was a song we used to cover. Also, I'm a Fool for Your Stockings.
Mm-hmm.
Tube Steak Boogie. I mean, not the typical ones. I mean, you try to do LaGrange, if you don't have you got to have a pro level drummer to actually pull off LaGrange and do it, make it sound
shuffle
right.
Like that.
Yeah, that's very hard to play and get it right. For a cover band to get that right and make it sound right.
Man, just got paid today. Might be my favorite Les Paul guitar tone that I've ever heard anywhere. The tone on that track is incredible.
Yeah, yeah. It's and all that's early. You know, it was almost two almost two epochs of periods, times of.
Right.
You got the early phase, you got the pre-eliminator and post-eliminator. Really, you know, they took that 3-year break, and they claimed that it wasn't planned to be a 3-year break. They took it for a month, and then 6 months, and then a year, and then 2 years, and ended up being 3 years. And then their manager, what was his name? Bill. They kept talking about him in that documentary. Spoke Bill Ham, was it? Very high, very, very high. He made the band in a way. And he said, we got a new label that wants to sign you. And another thing, they didn't mention this in the documentary, but I read other articles that contract they signed, okay, they did that world tour where they had live animals on stage. They had a buzzard. Frank Beard said if he slowed down, the buzzard would be sitting right behind him and thinking he's dying. So I got to speed up the tempo. Because the buzzards were on a perch. 2 buzzards right behind him. They had a buffalo that they lead out and a big longhorn. Crazy stuff. Dusty said we weren't really a big enough band to be able to afford that. You know, all those.
Right.
You imagine moving all those animals today. Animal rights would have a fit.
Yeah, there's no way they'd be able to pull that off today.
You couldn't do that today. So they did that. I don't know how many. It was a long extended tour. I think multiple years with that zoo, basically, of animals. And when they got done, deservedly so, they were exhausted. And Frank Beard said that he got the biggest check he'd ever gotten in his life, $72,000. And the interviewer asked him, off-camera interviewer asked him, what'd you spend it on? And he goes, I spent every bit of it on drugs. Because he had a huge drug problem. He said,
that was a pile of money back then, too, man.
Pile of money. In the early 70s, pile of money. Or, late 70s, mid-70s, late 70s. Because Eliminator came out in there was an album before Eliminator. I think it was the one that had Degulo is my favorite album. That's my favorite album. It's got it's got Fool for Your Stockings. Remember what else it's got? It's got Manic Mechanic. You know, he has he was at a DJ was using a voice shifter and he changed his voice and he picked that up and used that and said, I'll be back next week, Jack, and let the machine speak.
I like ZZ Top's first album.
Yeah, I do too. You know, it's more raw. But
and it stands out to me, man, that like you can count on one hand how many guitar players have had. You know, most guys either have like a Fender tone or a Gretsch tone or a Gibson tone or they're acoustic players. And Billy Gibbons is one of the only people I can think of that had a great Fender tone and a great Gibson tone. Like Billy Gibbons, Mark Knopfler, Clapton did it. But you can count on one hand the guys that like their Strat sound was as good as their Les Paul sound and vice versa. It's easy to identify his Gibson tone and it's easy to identify his Strat tone as well, especially in the earlier stuff when he was using a lot of Strats.
Yeah, especially I was going to say Mark Knopfler because I mean he made his bones Sultans of Swing. Definitely, he was the reason that Fender went from a 3-position pickup to a 5-position pickup. Right, Dave? You heard that story? You know, there's a 5-position pickup, and he would balance it between positions. I don't know, 1 and 3, or if it was the neck pick, if it had the neck pickup in it, or if it had the bridge pickup. I'm not sure which one.
Yeah, out of phase thing.
The out of phase, either the position 2 or position 4.
Yeah,
and you couldn't do that until he would have to balance it in between.
I've had guitars like that.
What's that?
I've had Strats like that. Old Strats where you got to balance it in between the settings, and you breathe on it. Yeah, man, you breathe on it and it'll pop back. Well, I mean, not necessarily old Strats, but the reissues, they make the reissues as legit as they can. And they've gotten away from doing it that way. But in the early 2000s, I bought a 57 Strat reissue and it had a 3-way switch.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Well,
It's
you've got a pre 65 Strat.
yeah,
What 61? What
61.
61.
Yeah, it's my favorite.
I like a
guitar.
steel trap. I remember the year.
That's right. My favorite guitar, man. And it's been sounding like a boss recording lately through that Leslie.
Now that's got a 3 position, unless it's been swapped out.
It's got a 5 position. The guy that had it before me swapped it out.
Sacrilege!
Yeah.
You should be strung up.
Oh, at one point he had a Floyd Rose on it.
What? On a 61 Strat?
Right? Yeah, he took the regular tremolo out and
I'm
put
so
a Floyd
disgusted.
Rose.
I need a barf bag.
Well, remember, man, in the 80s, Gibsons were the same way. Like when I was getting into it, nobody cared about Strats or Les Pauls. Everybody was playing super Strats. When I was getting into playing guitar, everybody wanted like
Van Halen, like Kramer or
Kramer's, Jackson. It was, Eddie Van Halen ruled the guitar universe, and nobody cared about Stratocasters in the 80s as much, or Les Pauls. You could buy Les Pauls for next to nothing. It was all super Strats and Ibanez and locking tuners and Floyd Rose and active pickups and all that stuff. I'm glad it came back around. But there was a certain tone that happened in the 80s, especially with the shred guys, where it was all just hot pickups and really, really overdriven amplifiers, which we was kind of having that conversation the other day about how much of it is really the pickups and how much does the tone would actually have to do with it. Remember that video? There's a great video of the guy that made that guitar out of concrete.
Yeah, you sent that to me, and I'll watch that.
And the guitar sounds awesome. So it's like, does it even matter what kind of wood the guitar's made out of? I don't know.
The body, I mean, very specifically, the neck woods, not just the fretboard. There's no doubt that a maple fretboard versus a rosewood fretboard on the same guitar will be radically different.
Sure, you can hear that easy. And
I would submit, and I think you agreed with me in our previous conversation, the wood of the neck makes a difference. In fact, you said that because you had a Les Paul. They put maple on the necks of the Les Pauls.
In fact,
my 78 Les Paul, which has P90s, has a maple neck, and that's an interest. And most of them are, I believe, mahogany. Right? It would be mahogany.
Yeah.
Although Paul Reed Smith, there was a guy that I bought my Mesa Boogie amp from. The Guitar Sioux Falls Music, which is now closed, unfortunately. It was like the center. It was probably the best music store in the state of South Dakota. And Guitar Center came to town, and they downsized. They sold their building, and they got half size, and they eventually just closed. But anyway, I bought my Mesa Boogie amp there, and so that's a $3,000 custom order amp. So when I walked in there, they like, "Hey, hi Tim, how you doing?" No.
Right.
Customer. So we were talking about custom guitars, and he said that he'd played I think it was a Paul Reed Smith that had a 100% rosewood neck, not just the
fretboard,
the entire neck. And he said he about jizzed in his pants when he played it.
Wow.
He said it was unbelievable. But rosewood's an expensive wood. Sorry for PG. That wasn't PG.
It's getting harder to come by.
So, and they even talk about how many piece necks, but actually you don't want you want those glue joints to strengthen that neck. I believe a 3 or 5 piece. There's nothing wrong with a 3 or 5 piece neck. I feel. What's your opinion?
Yeah, doesn't have to be one piece of wood for sure.
Whereas in the bodies, you can find debates ad nauseum on if the maple cap on a Les Paul is multiple pieces or how many pieces the mahogany body is. You know, if it's 1 piece or 2 piece or 3 piece. My 81 Les Paul is 3 piece maple top. So.
Yeah, you can hear a huge difference. The old Les Paul I had from '76 sounded more like a Telecaster than a Les Paul. But I still think that the pickup and what happens with your hands is the biggest determining factor of what it sounds like, you know?
Yeah, the greatest guitar player in the world, Joe Bonamassa. For those of you that don't know, that was sarcasm. He puts right on his Facebook page, best guitar player, greatest guitar player, or something like that. Self-aggrandizement.
The blues rock titan.
Yeah. He says that when he heard Robin Ford play, he was a huge fan of Robin Ford. And no matter what Robin Ford was playing through, borrowed guitar, different back lines, because I guess he must have toured with him or something. And he said he always sounded the same. Didn't matter what he played through. Just pick up a guitar that somebody loaned him. His regular, I mean, you know, pro players like Robin Ford has his favorite gear, of course. I know he was a big Dumble fan for a while, but still, you give those top guys, Hendrix. I mean, Hendrix on the Isle of Wight Festival, he's playing a Flying V there for some of that. He still sounds the same.
Yeah, sure. Sure. And a lot of those records were recorded with a Fender Twin. A lot of Electric Ladyland was done on a Twin. Voodoo Child was recorded on a Bassman. And it's, you know, he's famous for the Marshall and the Strat, but he used all kinds of stuff. Hey Joe was on a Telecaster. There's some of those tracks that the leads were recorded on a Les Paul, and then of course the Flying V in the last couple albums.
Wow, I wish to learn from you. I don't know all of those details.
Just Hendrix, man. I've been obsessed with him since I was about 11.
So anyway, in the couple of takeaways from the ZZ Top documentary for me, it's on Netflix. Anybody who hasn't seen it, if you're at all interested in 70s, 80s rock and you like ZZ Top, I would encourage you to do it. The number one takeaway is that in previous interviews that I've seen, and I've got his book, he came out with a book. Billy F. Gibbons, Rock and Roll Gearhead, because he's a big car guy as well. And he comes across in every other interview I've seen, and in this book, is too cool for school, really arrogant, my perception. And I didn't like that. I like his playing, but I do not like arrogance. I cannot stand it. But I got to say that in that documentary, he didn't come across arrogant at all.
I agree.
Maybe being married has toned him down a bit. He's been married recently now. For his longtime girlfriend, he finally married her. And that was my number one takeaway. And my other one takeaway, on top of the fact that these guys are world-class, iconic classic rock players, when you start talking about their outside interests, I feel, I mean, not only do you guys, you know, Billy Gibbons is one of the best guitar players in the history of electrified guitar. On top of that, he's got a great car collection that has all these custom cars, which is another interest. And then Frank Beard, the one that really got me, Frank Beard, who plays drum parts that the average, at least when you play in pickup bands and you play a ZZ Top song, it never sounds the same because the drummer can't quite do what Frank Beard does.
No, he's a shuffling fool, man.
He's a scratch golfer. I don't know if you've ever been a golfer. But to be a full-time musician touring the world and now he's like 70. I don't know if he's still a scratch golfer, but that's an accomplishment that in itself, I mean, you're on the fringes. You could play. I mean, you wouldn't get your tour card probably, but you could play and not be embarrassed with Tiger Woods and DJ. Scratch golfer, it doesn't get any. That means you get no handicap. That means you're at the same level as everybody else. Now that doesn't mean you could be in the MPGA, but you're not that far away from it. If you're really bored down, you possibly maybe the senior tour, especially because that's a little less competitive. Being a scratch golfer, that's a big deal. You know, for people that play golf, I don't know. And so Frank Beard's scratch golfer and being one of the greatest shuffle players that I've ever heard. Billy Gibbons, phenomenal guitar player, and he's got these I mean, how can you over accomplish in multiple unrelated fields?
Oh, yeah.
I can't take it.
And they've kept that band together.
And they kept the band together. Oh, I was going to say that I remember that contract. So they went on that tour with the menagerie of animals. Took 3 years off, and supposedly they didn't talk to each other, Dusty and Billy. And they came back, and they were shocked to find that both of them had foot-long beards. That seems like a little bit of PR. I can't believe they didn't plan that just accidentally they both grew beards.
Yeah.
But they were known for that contract that they signed when they came back. I remember that was one of the most artist-friendly contracts that any band had signed. I remember reading that in the business press, and it wasn't mentioned in the documentary, but Billy Gibbons is an amazing, smart guy. And there's other members of the band too. But and then they had Bill Ham. So that contract that they signed was way out of the norm for how it was favored towards them versus the common, typical contract that was signed in those days.
Yeah, and plus the video thing happened right on time for them.
Well, they admitted. I mean, I like the video. They both, they're both like 70 now, or maybe plus or minus, so they realize that they're never going to have that fame again. They're looking back, enjoying what time they have left on this earth, and maybe the arrogance has oozed out of them. But I remember Dusty said, it was completely perfect accidental timing for us. We came out and the videos became a thing. Oh, they said when they first saw MTV, they were watching it and they called each other and they were watching it and it kept going and they were calling each other. This has been going for 4 hours because they thought it was just kind of a special. And they said, when's this going to end? How long is this? It's an actual channel, Billy. It's a new deal. And that's how they discovered it. And they said, well, we need to start doing videos.
Yeah.
They hired short people, Randy Newman. Randy Newman's brother or related to Randy Newman, a film director. Last name Newman. Maybe his brother, but or could be cousin, but related to him. And he's the guy that put together those videos for them that really accelerated them to the peak of stardom.
Sharp. They were a staple. Yeah. MTV in the early days, man, ZZ Top was a staple.
They were. They're probably one of the ones who most successfully, because they had the perfect branding. They had this iconic beard, looked like nobody else, sunglasses, the sharp custom cars, and
they always had the girls in the videos.
They always had the girls, yeah. So now Billy doesn't have any kids, but Frank's got kids. I don't think Dusty does. But I just wonder, his kids are probably middle-aged now. He's 70. He's probably got kids that are about, 40.
They're incredible live too, man.
What's that?
They're incredible live still. It's probably been 6 or 7 years since I've seen them, but they were great last time I saw them live.
Yeah, I saw them in South Dakota at the State Fair, and it was amazing. It was amazing.
And that's Billy Gibbons' superpower, man. It's not that he's a powerhouse at one thing. It's how he puts it all together. And that's a certain kind of thing that, it's even above and beyond songcraft of him just putting everything together in the way that he presents it. There's a level of musicianship there that's really heavy, man.
Well, the engineer that they had with the doubling the guitars and down tuning one of them slightly and then panning left and right made the record sound really big too.
Those records still hold. Those records sound as big as anything.
Yes, they do. They do.
Still.
They hold up. all
Those
of them.
balls of guitar.
Yeah. So yeah, kudos to ZZ Top.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And really, it's funny too because there's very, very few overdubs on those albums. Most trios have tons of overdubs on the albums where you listen to it and it's like we can't do this live, and they never did that. I mean, they kept it real from the standpoint of we want to be able to do this live, because there's rarely, if ever, an overdub on a ZZ Top album. If there is, it's really sparse.
My favorite ZZ Top song, ballads, I like ballads, is Blue Jean Blues. And there is a rhythm guitar in that. There's a rhythm guitar in that, and then the lead over the top, based on my analysis. So there's one that has, but it's not front and foremost. I mean, it's just the background, the whole
right
together. It's such a slow tempo. I remember we used to play that, cover that, and the drummer would always complain, it's almost too slow. He can't keep time. It was so slow. He had trouble keeping time anyway. You heard one of the things we did, and you were measuring the BPM. Did the song start at 102 and it ended up at 130?
Yeah, it moved like 30 BPMs through the course of the song.
So he had trouble keeping time anyway, George. But he complained that, playing Blue Jean Blues, probably 60 beats per minute.
Well, that's how you find out how good your timing really is.
Well, he was timing challenged anyway, as the drummer. I mean, the drummer's should be the best, have the best timing in the band.
Yeah. The only time I struggle with it is if I have something that's real intricate with the fingers. If it's a part with like an alternating bass line you're recording, it's hard to do all that and think about the meter at the same time. So I like to record that stuff with the metronome if I can. If it's real intricate. Because you're focusing so much on what you're playing and keeping it even and trying to keep balance, that time just goes out the window and you forget that,
Yeah, you're trying to keep every note the same volume and same intensity.
Right.
And timing is another value.
Exactly right. And you can only do so much at once. And I've had recordings like that where I'll get through a take and think, man, I just nailed it, and listen back and the time is just garbage because you can't even tap your foot to it, That's when I found that I struggle the most. Finger style stuff, it's hard to keep time. I read a great quote one time. I can't remember who said it, but it was some famous drummer, and he said it's everybody's responsibility to keep time, but it's the drummer's responsibility to keep time interesting. And I thought that was a wonderful quote, man, because there's oftentimes you run into drummers that have incredible time, but they sort of miss that excitement, playing with excitement. And then you have lots of other drummers that are really exciting, but they can't keep time. So I really like that quote.
Yeah, well, I ran to Chick-fil-A this morning to get a quick something to eat. And God's chicken. Anyway,
it really is.
Jamaica came on by Led Zeppelin, and I have to confess that I had to Shazam it because I was like, man, I know who this is. I know this song. That sounds awful lot like Led Zeppelin, and I had to Shazam it to make sure. And I'm like, yeah, because I've just Shazammed it before and forgot. And just listening to I actually thought it was a cover because it was the radio station. And they normally play recent music, but I guess they reach back sometimes too. 100.1 Hot 100 in Nashville, which has been voted the number one. It's an independent radio station.
Great station.
It is a great station. And they had that song on there. And I was just listening to it, and I'm like, man, I thought it was a cover because it's now becoming a not uncommon thing that modern bands will cover an older song and pretty much do it exactly the same way it was originally done. I've heard some 80s songs done that way.
I heard a
pull.
cover the other day in a restaurant of Weezer doing the song Africa.
Oh,
And I didn't even know it existed, but it was so spot on that it freaked me out. It was like note for note, dude. They had the same tones and everything. So you're right. I mean, those covers, the idea of the cover is getting further away from taking a song and making it your own. It's becoming more impressive to emulate the original recording.
yeah. I believe Todd Rundgren did that. I can't remember what band he covered, but he covered a band and he sounded exactly like him 20, 30 years ago. Anyway, so I'm listening to that and I'm like, I thought it was a cover, and I'm like, man, that drummer's pretty amazing. He's getting all those, because the fills on there. I mean, I'm sure I'm not a drummer, so I don't know, but the fills to me, the drums make that song.
Sure.
I mean, very interesting song, but the fill,
the drums make a lot of Led Zeppelin songs, I think.
So, and the fills aren't short; they go on in that song. There's some extended fills. They're like da 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 da. They're melodic.
Well, I've read that it was kind of a standing joke in Led Zeppelin when they recorded the song, because they said the Bonham could play anything except for reggae.
Oh, I hadn't heard that part.
Yeah. And it's interesting. His approach to that song is interesting, because it's not reggae. In reggae music, you have, like, they call it the one drop, which is built around the heartbeat, and it has that kind of taka, 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 taka. And so most reggae beats would be like the bass and then the snare and then the bass and then the snare and like 16ths on the hi-hat. And he went the other way with that. It's completely different than how a regular reggae beat would be. I think that's one of the most interesting songs they have musically. That and Full in the Rain. The drum part on Full in the Rain is really, really cool, because it's a shuffle, but it's a halftime shuffle. But yeah, I think that's the biggest reason why they were as successful as they were, in my opinion.
Well, all four members were pretty amazing. I mean, Jimmy Page was a studio guitar player.
Yeah,
I feel, more than a live. Although he was great. Like the solo in Stairway to Heaven was a comped solo from a bunch of different takes that they cut the tape and splice it together, based on what I've read. But he was a genius in the studio. I mean, he used,
no question,
in the late 60s, early 70s, he maximized the use of the studio. And so that, no one else in that band had that skill. And John Paul Jones, I've heard it said that he's often underestimated as what he brought to that band. People often forget about him. Bonham, oh Bonham, and Jimmy Page, and but John Paul Jones, the quiet, supported a lot. And he played keys on some of the stuff.
Those last two albums were, I feel like, mostly him, especially Presence. It just feels like Presence was mostly Jones. Almost like they hit a creative wall and they finally started to open up and let him compose. That's the impression I get just listening. But yeah, and he'd play the mandolin parts at the shows and stuff. I've also read that what made them unique as a rhythm section is that they would take funk albums, like James Brown albums, and slow them down to like half speed on the turntable and learn how to play them. And so John Paul Jones and Bonham developed this crazy they could lock in, and they had that kind of playing on the and thing down from doing listening to the James Brown album slowed down. And I think it's prevalent, man. Like I would always argue with my friends in high school because they'd say Zeppelin's the greatest band in the world, and I would always play my Allman Brothers live at the Fillmore, and I'm like, well, listen to these guys, they're way better. But to me, it seems like when you watch those concerts of Zeppelin, I mean, Page and Plant were brilliant, but it seems to me like it's the rhythm section that carried those shows because they're incredibly consistent. No matter how off some of the singing was or how sloppy some of the leads were, the bottom is always there on those live Zeppelin performances.
Well, even, I mean, it's a well-known secret. A live album isn't necessarily live. You know, I remember I was playing in the worship band at the church, and I play here in Nashville also. In Franklin, full life, and we've got Friendsgiving tonight. We've got
nice
Thanksgiving meal. If you're in town, I would insist that you come with. But
I would, man, if I was there.
Anyway, a California worship leader came into town, and he had some modest notoriety in the the Christian world with a worship album. And I got talking to him after practice before the service and talked to him about that. And he just brought up voluntarily, he said, yeah, that's a live album, but the only thing that's live on it, the only thing that's original from the live recording is the drums and the audience noise. Everything else was overdubbed. And that's not an uncommon thing. So
not at all.
I wonder, how much. Now there is a movie. What is it? What's the name of that album? How the West Was Won.
The Song Remains the Same.
The Song Remains the
Same. It's legit, man, because it gets messy. I think that's a front to back legit performance because some of it is pure slop.
If they did overdub, they did a poor job of overdub.
Yeah, if Jimmy Page could have overdubbed that, it'd be on a whole nother level. I think it's legit. Because there's a couple of moments on there where they're even. Well, another thing that always fascinated me about them is that I've read that Page said that probably half of the riffs from Led Zeppelin came from their impromptu nightly performance of Dazed and Confused. It would go on for like 45 minutes and they just jam. And he'd find riffs. And that's where, like, supposedly the riff for Whole Lotta Love and Kashmir and all these great riffs somehow came out of that jam. And there's a portion, if you watch the movie again, check it out, because there's a portion of that section in Dazed and Confused where they're for a couple minutes that they're looking for it. You know what I mean? Everybody's kind of playing a different part and then they sync up and it's cool. But so, they had an element of jazz. They had the same approach as a lot of the jazz bands conceptually that I don't think was really ever talked about enough. You could say at the core of Zeppelin, they were a jazz band because it was impromptu jams for compositions. I always like their acoustic stuff best. That third album, man, I love that album. Bronyar
Isn't there like a sixth album or so that was a lot acoustic?
The fifth one was Houses of the Holy. There's a lot of acoustic on that.
Maybe that's the one that I'm thinking of.
That's Jermaker is on that one, and Over the Hills and Far Away. That's a good album. I like 3 the most because it has probably my favorite Zeppelin track, Since I've Been Loving You, that minor blues song that's really slow. I love that track. And I love Bronyar Stomp, Friends. And it's mostly acoustic. And I think it was cleaner. Their acoustic stuff just had a different element to it. To me, it's what made them unique.
Well, after Bonham died and they said we can't have Led Zeppelin without Bonham, Page and Plant went on to do a project together. And I've read articles that John Paul Jones felt like he was snubbed. he was left out of all that. Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah. Yeah, I have read that he felt like he was stumped. You know, Robert Plant had made a couple really cool albums in the 90s. I think he did some interesting stuff. Now and Zen was a really cool album. I think that he probably shined even more than Page after they parted. I mean, Page had The Firm, and then he did the stuff with the guys from. I think so.
Yeah, the Honey Drippers was Plant. I'm pretty sure. Lead singer.
The Honey Drippers.
Yeah, Robert Plant. Formed the group in 81.
Oh, cool. Well, and then Page had The Firm.
Yeah.
And they had a hit, I think.
Honey Drippers had a hit too. I can't remember which one it was, but so these bands, breaking up and starting other projects. They probably were competing. My new band is going to outperform your new band.
You know they were.
Of course they were. Yeah. Just like the Beatles were,
Yeah, and then Harrison killed everybody when they first broke up. They hadn't used any of George's songs for so long that
you got a double album.
Yeah, he was dropping stuff
like,
yeah, he was dropping stuff like crazy, and it was amazing. I think it's healthy, It's healthy to keep your musical hands in as many different things as you can and as many different projects as possible. I've been having a blast recording lately in this little studio, man. It's in the basement of a dentist office and cutting all the parts myself and loving it, man. I'm loving it right now. It's just been a blast. Some of the best guitar tone I've ever gotten.
Awesome.
Leslie.
Can't wait to hear it.
Yeah, man. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. We've been on for 40 minutes, so
thank y'all for watching us.
Appreciate it.
Tim, my man.
Got some interesting information and entertainment, maybe.
Yeah.
And we'll see you next time. Normally, we're on every Wednesday at noon Eastern Standard Time, but that does vary. But that's our
little bit of wiggle room.
Little wiggle room there. So, Jimi D and the Wolf.
See you, brother.
See you next time. Yeah, see you.